All right, thanks so much for that very kind introduction. So today I'm going to talk to you about monetary famine, paper money, and international constraints on economic growth in the case of colonial Quebec. So this is a work in progress, and I'm still working on it. Looking forward to getting some comments and feedback. This is going to be kind of merging economic history and then looking also at balance of payments constrained growth and Thirlwall's law. I really like this project. It grew out of teaching, actually, teaching graduate economic history, macroeconomic history. I started looking into this case of colonial Quebec, and they introduced the first paper money in the West. And so thinking about, how that kind of economic history matters for the economics of Quebec's development. So we're talking about colonial Quebec or Canada. The Canada we know today, with a large English-speaking population, is really going to be an artifact of a later period after the American Revolution, when the loyalists who stay loyal to British Empire are going to settle in what's now Canada. So, at this time, it's primarily a French colony. It's going to be centered on the St. Lawrence Seaway there. That's really the kind of Quebecois heartland. Most of the cities are going to be around there. Later, New France is going to extend into the Mississippi Valley, into Louisiana. And there's also Acadia, which is part of this story. Sometimes it's going to be included, sometimes not, but we'll focus mainly on Quebec. This is mainly the kind of region we're talking about here. So Quebec and New France as a colony is going to be, the goal by France is basically a mercantilist goal, kind of economic nationalism, to both extend French authority to the New World and also to, develop France itself. The development of Quebec is kind of secondary. They're going to be doing these kind of statist policies to try and extract resources from Quebec. And as we'll see, that's going to affect their terms of trade and other factors. So they're going to face these trading monopolies or other methods with the exchange rate to try and extract resources from Quebec. But here, they're not going to be able to extract all that much. So in the American colonies, the British can extract more. Here, it's really hard to get settlers to go to such a cold place like Quebec. At the time, we have climate change today, and then also it's just a very cold period just because of natural changes in the climate. So it's very hard to get settlers to come there. So, they're going to try to extract some resources, but the French are also going to try to encourage settlement as well, and trying to get the right sticks and carrots to both develop the colony enough that there's economic resources to extract, but they can't extract too much initially to try and encourage settlement. The really formative period is going to be in the 17th century. And so the main economic activity is going to be hunting beaver. So there's going to be beaver skins, which are economically profitable, and the native Canadians are going to have a lot of experience working with these furs. So there's beavers in Europe, but at this time they're mostly farmed out. So they've been over hunted, and there's not many left. Quebec is very cold, but that makes the beavers develop thicker fur. So these are really valuable economic resource, and they can essentially barter with the natives to get this economic resource that then they can export. So in terms of the export demand, which is going to be the driver of Quebec's growth, it's going to be mainly dependent on European demand for this resource. So, you basically hunt beaver, you kill them. So the natives had done that for a while. So they're going to trade with European settlers to export this resource. And so then there's all kinds of different ways to get different quality beaver skins. The best way to get higher quality beaver skin is to actually wear it for a season and get really sweaty. And so that's actually the higher quality export product. In fact, the beaver is very important for the natives. It's a major kind of trade good. And so they actually make up coins. This is actually a British coin. I didn't find any copies of French coins, where this is a coin that's worth one beaver skin, so that then they could trade with the natives and then use these tokens, so you wouldn't necessarily have to carry around the beaver skin. So this is not going to be worth a certain amount of gold or silver or unit of account. This is going to be worth one beaver skin, and then that's meaningful when you're trading with the natives who already have established this process of producing beaver skins. And Canada still has this legacy of having beaver money. So this is the Canadian nickel from 2018. So they still have some coins that reflect that legacy. So the kind of classic Quebecois type is this woodsman called a Coureur De Bois. And so they're going to go in canoes and go try to trade with the natives. So the French authorities are going to try to license these guys to limit how much they go out, but it's very hard to control. They're very independent. So, basically the French attempts to control their activity is going to be not going to be very effective. So they're going to try to, profit from the beaver exports. But these kind of Canadian woodsmen are going to just go out in their canoes and trade with the natives. The church is very important here in this period, and so they don't like the relations with the natives and native women, and they trade alcohol with the natives. So obviously they like to barter beaver skins for alcohol and so on. So all of that is sort of part of the social history, which I won't touch on all that much. But this is going to be the main way that trading is going to occur for these export goods. And so then the summer is going to be important because it's really cold, as I said. So the St. Lawrence is going to freeze. This will play a role later when we talk about, shipping money back and forth. So the summer market's going to be important where everybody's trading things. And so the beaver skin is going to develop as a form of money because it's important for the natives. It has a certain amount of value, and then it's the major export good as well. And then there's also going to be European coins circulating, and they'll do things like have just record keeping credit and so on. So you've got really a lot of different forms of money that are taking place in order to trade. So also textiles are important to trade with the natives, but that's something that Quebec can't produce itself. So that's going to be yet another thing they have to import. So you really want to think about Quebec at this time as a kind of small open economy, like many developing economies today. And so the additional wrinkle is this kind of trade with the native Canadians, the First Nations peoples. And so they're going to have to import some products from France to then barter to get beaver skins and other products locally. So this is Quebec City. So I guess we have a native here. So in the audience. This is what the cities are going to look like. Montreal is going to be the major area, kind of urban settlement, because it's a bit closer to major populations of First Nations peoples. But Quebec City is going to be important as well as an earlier city. And so you can see the settlements are going to kind of cling to the coast along the river. So, the river is very important, and the cities are going to spring up along there because you have access to trade with Europe. And then you can go in boats down down the Great Lakes or into the interior to trade with the natives. So really, it's going to be a very open economy. Everything's, really trade related. There's very little domestic production that circulates domestically. There's some wheat that's farmed, but mostly you're exporting. Most economic activity is exported, so most demand is coming from abroad, and then most domestic demand is then going to go towards imports. So there's very little activity that goes on domestically. So this is what the coins are going to look like. This is the official French coinage, the louis d'or. And so this is, going to be the official money. The French mercantilist policies are also going to try to restrict the use of foreign coinage, but that's not really possible because there's lots of smuggling. So, they're trying to direct all commerce to go to the metropole, but the Canadians like to trade with New England, Nova Scotia. There's Acadia, Nova Scotia. There's some Dutch colonies at the time right around New York, which is New Amsterdam back then. So they're not able to fully control this. And, there's no mines in the French or British colonies, no major gold or silver mines. So the major currency is usually going to be the Spanish dollar. And so that's going to be popular. And so the French eventually kind of give up, and they're going to force people to weigh foreign coins. And then they're going to stamp them with the fleur-de-lis so that, it gets some... it's going to get some official recognition as a French coin, so it can't circulate back in other countries. But early on, there's not going to be enough French coins, because where do the French coins come from? They're going to have to ship them over on boats. The boats can only sail in the summer. And then often the French government is just not going to send enough coins. So the French state is going to be broke from all the wars with the English. And so they're just not going to send enough coins. But there's always this problem of a shortage of coins because they've got to import so much. All the coins are going to flow out, and they're always going to face these balance of payments constraints, which is going to cause a monetary shortage. So, it's natural that the Spanish colonies like Mexico, where you can mint coins because you have silver mines, those coins are going to become more prevalent in the New World, even though these mercantilist governments are going to try to restrict the use of foreign coins. All right, so what's the domestic Canadian monetary environment going to look like? Barter is going to be common with the First Nations people, but you're going to need specie for imports. So they don't really care about the European coins, but if you want to buy imports, you've got to have specie because the French merchants are going to want a specie. They're not going to want other types of money. And so beaver skin is going to develop as a common means of exchange because it's an export good. So people have said, well, this is just, important because it's something that, is a big part of the economy. I think there's a better reason for it, which is that it's an export good. And so then you have an option value for specie, right? So you can go to the merchants and say, here's a beaver skin, and then I'll get specie later. And then, you can actually get goods from Europe, which is most of the goods you want to consume. And of course, you can't trade with other colonies officially. So all trade is supposed to go through France. So, if you want to get tobacco from Virginia, it has to ship through England to France, back to Quebec. So, I think that the export good is often going to arise as a form of money because it's an option value for specie. And so it's going to be similar to tobacco in colonial Virginia. They'll have tobacco warehouse receipts that will circulate as money. The problem with using something like beaver skin as money is that then you get Gresham's law. So all the bad beaver skins are going to circulate as money, right? And the good ones are going to be used as actual beaver skin. So you get very bad quality beaver skins. But you're going to see this in a lot of places that the export good is going to arise as a form of money because you have this specie shortage, because there's this need to import, which is really going to constrain how much both you can buy now and then also how much you can invest. But more on that later. So a lot of authors have talked about beaver skin as just a barter good, but I think we should, not think of gold and silver just inherently as being money and other commodities not as being money. We should think about that these are money just like gold or silver. They're just a different commodity. So what else about the balance of payments? Traditionally the balance of payments is the current account and the capital account. But in the colonial context, there's no capital account at all. So this is one way that, the balance of payments constraints on growth are really going to bind. Not only is it a kind of long run relationship, but there's no real capital account. There's no way to sell claims to future output. There's no developed financial markets. The French financial markets are underdeveloped relative to, say, Dutch financial markets in the period. And so, there's no way to say, here's stock in a beaver skin company and, we're going to list it on the Paris bourse. You're basically going to have to finance any kind of investment through the current account. So basically the current account is going to be the trade balance. So the balance of payments is basically the trade balance. And then the other side of that is just going to be specie flows. But since specie is also domestic money, then there's going to be monetary consequences to balance of payments imbalances. So Quebec is always running a trade deficit officially, and then it's always suffering this specie outflow. And so then, people are going to then hoard money because you need specie to import. Everybody's using their imports, using their specie to import because you produce very few goods domestically. And so then you want to kind of hoard specie because you don't know when you'll be able to use these silver or gold coins again. So sorry, specie is the silver or gold coins that you use, like the louis d'or. So that's going to connect these balance of payments issues with domestic monetary conditions, and then people are going to then hoard specie because they want to be able to buy things, and so then that's going to worsen things further because then you can't know that you'll be able to get specie when you sell because the other person might be hoarding specie, so then you have to hoard specie so you're not short later, and so on and so forth. And so this is not unique to Quebec. You have lots of countries that complain about these issues, that, you know, they can never keep specie domestically. It's always going to flow outwards. So you see it in the American colonies. So Franklin writes about it extensively. And eventually the Pennsylvania colony is going to emit paper money just for reasons of prosperity. Just because there's a shortage of specie, they're going to emit some paper money by the colonial government just to try to alleviate this specie shortage in the colonies. So my favorite way to address this is the New South Wales Holey dollar. This is not the unholy dollar, but the holy dollar. So Australia is not unified yet. There's several colonies. And so in New South Wales, they're suffering the same kind of outflow of specie. So this is a Spanish coin, a Spanish real. And so what you do is, to stop it from going back to Spain or somewhere else, you stamp a hole in it and you write New South Wales on it. So now it's no longer a Spanish dollar. And then you can use the little hole in the middle as a smaller denomination coin. And so this is a kind of direct way to try and stop money from leaving the colonies. And so that's effective. You know, it's not going to go back to Spain now. But you can see that in lots of different colonial environments, they're having the same kind of balance of payments issues and monetary shortages. So French authorities are well aware of this. And so they create this institution called Monnoye de Pays, which is kind of old French for kind of local money or country money. They're going to give a premium to local money over money in France. So in theory, you've got, you know, one country or one empire, but they're going to try to make money worth more in Canada versus in France. So depending on how you look at it, it's a premium of a quarter or a third, depending on which side of the ratio you do. But basically, and this is old money, so this is French pounds. You have 100 pounds in the local money in Monnaie de Pays, and then you have the French money in livre tournois so 100 livres locally is going to be worth only 75 back in France, and so then you're going to get more money if you bring it to the colonies. This is not going to be effective, of course, because the real exchange rate is just going to go back to 1. So prices will just adjust. So the prices locally are just going to be higher. And so this is partially a way to try and keep money in the colonies. It's also a way to subsidize or to profit if you're a trading company, because your costs are going to be local, and then you're selling things back in France. And so then, your French pounds are going to be worth more in Canadian pounds. And so you can profit from the difference. But this is also going to make the terms of trade worse in Canada, right? So then imports are going to be more expensive as a result of this policy. So how about capital accumulation in Canada, thinking about balance of payments of constraints on growth? So Canada is going to have abundant timber, obviously, but most manufactured goods have to be imported. So you're going to have to import nails, hammers, shovels, all that kind of stuff, especially because, you know, you want to keep manufacturing jobs in metropolitan France rather than having them in the colonies. And so then this is going to worsen the balance of payments. So as you're trying to grow, you know, you've got lots of population growth, as we'll see later. You need to build houses. You can't use the capital account. You can't just borrow money in France because there's no real capital markets. So you can't borrow money for a nail, or you can't, you know, sell claims to houses in Canada. Because there's no capital account. So all of that has to be go on the current account. So any attempt to grow more rapidly is going to put more strain on imports, because you're going to have to import any kind of metal implement to grow. Plus you have to import all the goods you need to barter with the natives. So all of that is going to put even more pressure on the balance of payments. And so the species shortage is both going to limit your standard of living in the current period, because you're not able to import as many European goods as you want. You have lots of wheat and lots of beaver skins, but your standard of living is going to be affected by a shortage of species. And then also, trying to grow and trying to invest in, say, even new buildings is going to mean lots of imports. So if you want to import any kind of farm implements, you've got to import that too. And that's just going to worsen the species shortage. So then you've got even less money domestically. So there is an attempt to have some metal manufacturing locally. So this is the Forge du Saint-Maurice, which is an attempt to produce some metal goods for warfare, things like that. So the French authorities are not really intervening too much on the kind of mercantilist side. There are some attempts to have some manufacturing locally, but it's not really all that successful. So mostly you've got to import any kind of manufactured good. All right, so let's dig deeper into the balance of payments. So if we think about imports, we've got the exchange rate, E. We've got some kind of price index of imports, price index of domestic goods, and then domestic income will give by Y. And then A is the income elasticity of imports, and then H is the price elasticity of demand. So as we'll see, what's going to happen is that these kind of factors are going to be quite unpleasant for Quebec. The exchange rate, you can't really depreciate it in real terms. There's attempts to, right? The price index for imports is going to be worsened by things like trading monopolies. So the French merchants are going to be encouraged by the French government. That's how they extract resources. But that's going to mean that the price of imports is going to be higher because they're doing all these kind of mercantilist policies. Then the price elasticity of demand, you're going to tend to, have to import a lot. So you're going to have fairly inelastic demand since you're importing most goods. And then we'll talk about domestic income growth, but it's going to be driven by things like population growth. And then the income elasticity of imports, that's going to be, low. High. So as your income grows, you're importing almost everything. So the growth of imports is going to closely track the growth of income. So you're not really creating many import competing domestic industries. So all those factors are kind of unfavorable in the Quebecois situation. How about exports? Here, we've got total exports X, E is nominal exchange rate, the price index of foreign goods, and the price elasticity of demand for exports is W. Z is the relevant foreign income, and then B is the income elasticity of exports. So here again, things are going to be unfavorable. Essentially, they're dependent on how much demand they're getting from Europe. So however much demand there is for beaver skin hats, those are going to be popular for a while, and then they won't be. So once tastes change against beaver skin hats, then there's not going to be as much demand for beaver skin hats. The price index of exports is going to be worsened by these trading monopolies. So the French government is going to underpay the beaver skin in Canada to try and fund the colony, essentially through a tax that way. So the export price they receive is going to be lower because of these mercantilist policies. There's going to be a fairly low price elasticity of demand for exports. Once you have one or two beaver skin hats, you're not really going to change much if the price changes. And then, what countries are going to be relevant for foreign income? You're exporting to France. And also, you can only export to France. So because of those mercantilist restrictions, you're only going to get whatever price the French government sets up. So you can't export to more lucrative markets like the Netherlands or Russia directly. You've got to go through France as an entrepot first. And then the income elasticity of exports is going to be low because people are not really going to buy that many more hats as they get richer. So all of these are pretty unfavorable for the Canadian context, which is further squeezing how they're able to grow because they're facing all kinds of unpleasant elasticities as a result of just how the economy is set up. So they're going to be dependent on demand, which is based on fickle tastes. As we'll see, the population in Europe is growing more slowly than in Quebec. So Quebec has really high fertility, basically unrestrained, whereas in Europe, you're still in a pre-industrial setting, so you don't have very rapid population growth. So the number of heads you can put beaver skin caps on is also not increasing very quickly. So this is the Quebec's population. The growth rate in some periods is going to be really high. So, you're basically, there's even some accounts of, French ministers sending over boatloads of teenage French peasant girls to try and increase the population, to try and ensure there's not too much of an imbalance versus the French men who are settling in Canada. So from 1666 to 1667, you get 22% population growth in just 1 year. So some of that is migration, some of that is population growth. From 1667 to 1679, you get an increase of 139%. So you're just getting really rapid population growth, and all those people are new consumers that have to be clothed and fed and so on. So there's going to be more pressure on imports without any additional exports necessarily resulting from that increase in population. In Europe at the time, you're still in a pre-industrial economy, even in England. So population growth is pretty much flat. You're starting to get a little bit more in places like England. But in Quebec itself, you're seeing really rapid population growth. And so to keep imports per capita constant, imports themselves have to go up. But that's not going to generate any more export demand. So basically, you have a kind of lump of demand in Europe. And then there's these pressures from population that are going to tend to push up imports, which is yet another reason why you're going to get species shortages. So there's even more pressure on the import side as a result. So in practice, unless there's some other source, maybe smuggling, maybe they're able to smuggle some goods. Obviously we don't have records of that if they're smuggling with New England or other British counterparties. But since they're importing almost everything, you can feed children with local wheat. You can clothe them in beaver skin furs, but most other goods, alcohol, clothing is going to have to be imported. And of course, you need some imports to barter with the natives too. So, we kind of beat around the bush a little bit. So just to formally think about the balance of payments constraints on growth, which, a lot of people have written on, Setterfield has written a lot of good stuff on that. Blecker's 2016 paper, also good, that, basically the balance of payments will roughly balance in the long run, that you can't have huge imbalances in your balance of payments. You won't get huge capital account surpluses. Here, I think we have a really clear example of balance of payments of constraints to growth, because the capital account basically doesn't exist. So, we kind of know that there's going to be balance of payments constraints to growth. So there's not too much that we need to argue about in terms of empirics, which is good because I'm limited in how much I can estimate from the empirical side. So I'm mostly making arguments about elasticities. But obviously the low elasticity of demand for exports is going to matter to constrain growth. So, the amount of demand they're getting from the exterior is going to be limited. They do have some government spending from France, that's mostly just related to warfare. And then there's going to be, a high elasticity of demand for imports. So they're just kind of stuck between those two. They're dependent on European demand once tastes change. So there's reports of taste changing in 1708, but as we'll see, basically the prices are going to have kind of secular tendency to fall. So they're stuck with a source of demand that's limited. And then they've got all these features that, if they want to grow and develop, have a higher standard of living, either now or in the future, they're going to face these constraints that they're just limited in how much they can import. The beaver skin hats obviously are, popular for a little while, but not forever. Obviously, people don't really wear them today. And so there are some fluctuations, but the kind of long-term trend in the price of beaver coats. So in terms of the pre-decimalized old Roman currency, so basically a livre or a pound is worth 20 sols. And then there's 20 deniers per sol. So this goes back to, Roman times where you had a Roman pound is worth 12 solidis. And then there's 20 denarius per solidis. So anyway, they're still using this old Roman denomination, but this is the price in sols. And so that's going to be on a kind of secular downtrend, so that as the market gets saturated, they're just going to be trying to export these beaver skin coats, but the price is just going to continue to worsen and worsen. And so they're also, kind of fighting this swimming upstream in this way because the prices are also getting less favorable to them. So they're dependent on a kind of lump of demand. They're exporting as much as they can to try and alleviate this balance of payments constraint, but they're also facing these headwinds that a lot of developing countries face, right? The old Singer-Prebisch hypothesis. So here's a kind of simplified so how am I doing on time? Doing okay? Maybe, what do you think for target time to end? 120, 130?
Yeah, I think that would be good, Gabe. If
okay, sounds good. Okay.
And, we can be a little flexible.
Okay, so. Sounds good. I just want to know. So this is a kind of simplified pre-1685 economy, so before paper money. And so basically you've got kind of specie flows going back and forth. The royal authorities are doing some administrative spending. So the colony can't support itself, even though, they're taxing and worsening the terms of trade in Quebec. The French authorities still have to spend. So that's going to be one source of demand, is they're just paying for bureaucrats and soldiers. And there's local Canadians, they're trading back and forth. Beaver skin is being used as money, but you can't use beaver skin with the French merchants. Of course, the royal authorities back in France don't want beaver skin. So all of those have got to go with specie. So, you can use beaver skin as a substitute, and it makes sense that you would substitute that. So you can use the international money for imports. You don't have to use it domestically. So it'll relax that constraint a little bit if you can use an alternate money. So why does Quebec introduce the first playing card money in the West? Well, they're going to fight with the Iroquois. So the Iroquois are the allies of the English. And so it doesn't go well. They kind of lose. So that disrupts the fur trade too. And because the natives are fighting, most of the native peoples are going to be enemies of the Iroquois. So they're allied with the French, but that's all going to disrupt the native fur trade and also tax revenues. There's more smuggling as a result. And France is also, the French authorities are not going to send enough money in 1685. And so, they're facing some persistent fiscal troubles from the many wars they're fighting with the English and other countries in Europe. And so the intendant, the kind of local governor, is going to try to send the soldiers to work in the fields because he has no money to pay them, but the fields are already planted. It's too cold, remember. And there's few choices over the winter because the French can't send boats. The St. Lawrence at the time actually freezes. So there's no prospect of boats coming. And, those shipments, if they're sending specie, if they're spending silver coin, they have to guard them from other countries who would raid those ships. So he has no other options. He basically issues an IOU on playing card stock. So that's useful because it's tightly controlled. So it's given a mercantilist monopoly, so that, the playing cards is a monopoly that, is only going to come from a royal corporation. Also, there's a lot of illiteracy and everyone can recognize the denominations of the cards. And so he's going to say, I owe you so much when the, French authorities send me some more specie. And so he's going to issue the cards to meet royal expenses throughout the fall, winter, and spring. And so, it's going to work out okay. And then they're going to redeem the playing cards for specie. There's also bills of exchange that they use. So essentially, the French have their own IOUs at the French Treasury. In theory, and in the early years, they're going to do this. They're going to redeem all the cards and burn them. In practice, of course, later on, as the fiscal situation deteriorates in France, they're just not going to redeem them. But some people, in the initial periods, they have enough specie to redeem all the cards, but people want to keep them to use in domestic commerce. So the cards are going to be very popular initially. So this is what they look like. So basically you have these playing cards, and then the authorities are going to write, how much they're worth and who's on the hook for them. So ultimately the king is going to be on the hook, the royal treasury. And so as you can imagine, there's a kind of back and forth with the king who's not very happy about this. So this is a later instance of the playing card money. So basically later on, they're going to give up on having the the actual playing card stock. So it'll just be blank playing card paper, and then they'll just write IOUs later on. So it's quickly going to devolve into just a pure paper money where they're just writing on them. So they're not even printed in formal printing facilities. So we actually have the letters from the intendant, Jacques de Mulle. So, he says that money's scarce. Instead, I did this. So this is actually his letter to the king. I made notes out of the cards. I sent you some examples, but, everything worked out okay. Nobody's refused them. And the troops have been able to live normally. So everything worked out, don't be mad. Early on, actually, the price level doesn't rise at all. And this is going to provide some way to alleviate the monetary shortage. So the king is going to complain. So the Europeans know about China having paper money for many centuries from Marco Polo, but they don't really get it. So they just kind of forget about China's paper money episode. So there's no mention of China. They think this is a new institution. And the king is going to complain about counterfeiting and inflation, especially counterfeiting, that this is too easy to counterfeit. And there was some counterfeiting. It's punishable by death. So they try to really clamp down on it. There is some counterfeiting, but the cards are really going to work to stimulate commerce. The king is going to be reluctant at first, but the merchants really like it, and initially prices don't rise. So as we'll talk about this later, but the quantity theory of money doesn't really apply here. So they're creating all this new money. And the prices don't budge. Everybody's happy. It's basically just as good as having a silver coin. It avoids the need to ship specie across the ocean, right? And then the cards don't work in New England. So for smuggling, it's better to have this local currency that only circulates domestically in Canada. So for this paper, it's important because it's going to separate domestic and international money. It's going to free up specie for imports because then you can use the domestic paper in Canada. So basically that paper is not going to circulate in France or in New England. So it's only going to circulate locally. You're not going to get this specie drain like you would in other contexts, and it's going to relax the balance of payments constraint. So then all the specie can be used for imports, and then you can use this paper money instead domestically. So I'm not seeing any questions. So if there's any questions, feel free to interrupt. Then that's going to, make things easier because now you can use playing card money. So you can use specie instead to buy imports. It's going to relax the balance of payments constraint. It would make sense actually, if we think about an equation of exchange, that, you don't have to hoard specie anymore. So then, now you have a lot more transactions. It's great for the merchants because they can always find people to pay with this paper money. And so it seems to have been economically stimulative by introducing this money because it's going to grease the wheels of commerce. And then, of course, it frees up specie for imports. So it's going to relax this balance of payments constraint. So there's a big debate on kind of quantity theory of money versus backing theory. So the traditional quantity theory of money says if you issue all this paper money, it's going to be inflationary. But the backing theory says instead that paper money won't be inflationary if it's backed by good money. So as long as there's credible fiscal backing, then as long as the money can be redeemed by a government that can collect enough taxes to back it, then the money will not inflate. And I think this is what you really see in this episode. So I think you could kind of see paper money as a type of endogenous money that you've got some liquidity preference for different types of money, and so then this. You're just going to have money demand that's going to kind of match with the additional paper money. And so then you don't get a kind of neoclassical inflationary effect because people just have preferences to be liquid in this way using paper money. And it's going to alleviate the balance of payments constraints. So in terms of the Quebec price level, I think it's going to really conform to this. You see certain episodes, basically during war times, the money is going to inflate. If not, if anything, when you emit this paper money, you're going to get some mild deflation. So you can see this big run up. That's Queen Anne's War, which is part of the War of Spanish Succession, which is going to strain French finances. But they're going to emit the paper money in 1685 thereabouts, and then the price level is going up or down, but nothing's really happening. Then they get rid of the paper money in 1717. Then the price level is constant, but then the merchants are all going to complain that there's no commerce, and so they're going to reintroduce them in the 1720s. in 1729. And so then you can see the price level again is flat. And then in the 1740s, you get Prince George's War, you get another inflationary episode. But ultimately, even though Louisbourg is captured by the English, it's going to be returned. So, there's no end to French rule. And then during the French and Indian War, then, the price level is going to inflate away. The French government promises to pay it off, even under British control. But with the French Revolution, that doesn't really happen in the end. Here you can see them withdrawing all paper money in 1717. It works well until they run into fiscal trouble. Here they're reintroducing it because the merchants complain. So, this paper money is really going to work. It's going to help alleviate the balance of payments constraints. And so the king has to reverse himself and print more paper money. So then they're going to do some bills of exchange. They just start saying, this is the intendant's signature. They're going to owe you a certain amount of paper money. So then the French government really likes this paper because their fiscal situation is always problematic. And so later that's going to influence the British colonies. And so they're going to print their own paper money in learning from the Quebecois experience, the Canadian experience. So in 1690 already, Massachusetts introduces its own paper money. All right, so I think I'm right on time. Thanks for your attention. I think I told you that, the colonial Quebec's experience, I think clearly fits a kind of balance of payments constraint on growth model. People in Quebec were severely limited, and most of their expenditures from imports. They're not able to use a capital account, so they have to import. Most kinds of capital are going to have to be imported. And so paper money is really going to help alleviate this, and they're going to suffer from similar issues as modern developing countries. So you've got a low elasticity of demand for exports, high income elasticity of imports, and high population growth, which are all going to worsen these balance of payments constraints. All right, thanks so much for your attention.
Thanks very much, Gabe. That was fabulous, and thanks for your exemplary timekeeping as well. Yeah. So, and you've just popped back out of the screen share. So I'm just looking. I think we are sufficiently small